roll credits, we're diving into Hamnet, the story inspired by the real-life tragedy that may have shaped Hamlet itself. And to start off this deep dive, I actually want you to imagine something for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine retiring today as, like, an incredibly wealthy billionaire.
Yeah.
You know, you have the world at your fingertips, the total adulation of the cultural elite. And instead of staying in the big city where you found all this success, you pack it all up, move back to the quiet countryside, and just choose to live out your remaining days with a woman who, according to history anyway, you absolutely despised.
I mean, that makes literally no sense.
Right. It makes zero sense. Yet that is the exact lie we've been told about William Shakespeare for centuries.
It totally is. It's this massive historical blind spot. And that's why we are looking at the 2025 film Hamnet, which was directed by Chloe Zhao and adapted from the best-selling novel by Maggie O'Farrell.
And it just totally flips the script on that old narrative, right?
Exactly. What this story does so brilliantly is just reject that old, dusty narrative completely. I mean, this isn't a traditional biopic where we watch a lone genius furiously scribbling with a quill in a dark room.
Yeah, thankfully.
Right? It's this deeply visceral, really physical exploration of grief, family, and memory. It anchors us not to the famous playwright himself, but to the unseen world of his household. You know, the people left behind in the margins of his legacy.
I want to dig right into that historical blind spot, actually, because the film completely shifts its center of gravity away from history's most famous writer to focus entirely on his wife.
Yeah, it really does.
And right off the bat, there is this naming discrepancy that I think throws a lot of people. Because, you know, we were all taught in school that William Shakespeare was married to Anne Hathaway. But in this film and in O'Farrell's novel, she is Agnes.
Which, by the way, isn't just some fictional invention. It actually comes straight from the primary source material.
Wait, really?
Yeah. In her father's will, she is explicitly referred to as Agnes Hathaway. You have to remember that in the Elizabethan era, there were no standardized dictionaries, so spelling and naming conventions were incredibly fluid.
So it just depended on who was writing it down.
Exactly. Agnes and Anne were largely interchangeable depending on the clerk filling out the document. But choosing to call her Agnes in this story is a highly deliberate narrative tactic. Maggie O'Farrell really wanted to formally rescue her from what she calls a centuries-long historical drubbing.
That's a great word for it, a drubbing. Because the smear campaign against this woman is truly astonishing. Like, if you look at the prevailing, mostly male-dominated biographies from the last few hundred years, they almost universally paint her as this illiterate, manipulative, older peasant woman.
Oh, totally.
The story always goes that she trapped this brilliant, penniless 18-year-old William into a miserable marriage simply because she got pregnant out of wedlock.
Yes, the classic narrative insists that she was this heavyweight dragging him down, forcing him to flee to London just to, escape her. And they love to point out that in his will, he famously left her his second-best bed.
Right, the infamous bed.
Yeah, they frame it as this final, petty insult from the grave. But when you look at the actual mechanics of his life, like O'Farrell did, that narrative just completely collapses.
Because of the money, right.
Exactly. William Shakespeare retired as an incredibly wealthy man. He could have stayed in London. He could have traveled anywhere. Instead, he bought New Place, which was the largest house in Stratford-upon-Avon, and actively chose to return home to live with her.
That is what I find so baffling. If a man is desperately fleeing miserable trap of a marriage, he doesn't buy a giant mansion just to move back in with the trap.
No, of course not.
So why are literary scholars so eager to accept this miserable marriage trope? It feels like they would rather believe he was tortured than just believe a young, poor William was genuinely captivated by an extraordinary woman.
Well, it really comes down to Victorian-era classism. There was this intense desire to elevate Shakespeare into a solitary, untethered god of literature. Think about how we mythologize genius, you know.
Oh, sure, the lone wolf artist trope.
Right. If you accept that Shakespeare was deeply connected to a wife who stayed in the country and that his work was profoundly influenced by his domestic life, well, that challenges the myth. Scholars wanted him to belong to the world, to the realm of pure intellect, not to a domestic, everyday life in Stratford.
And the film just dismantles that myth completely.
It really does. It reimagines Agnes, who's played by Jessie Buckley, as this fiercely independent healer. She isn't a trap at all. She is a total force of nature. And William, played by Paul Mescal, is just utterly drawn to her vibrant life force.
And because she is a character who's so grounded in the earth and her own physical intuition, the filmmakers couldn't just drop her into a standard polished Tudor movie set.
No, that wouldn't work at all.
Right. If you're going to argue that Agnes was the emotional anchor of his life, you have to build an environment that physically manifests her tactile sensory world, especially in contrast to William's intellectual boundaries.
And the visual language they use to establish those boundaries is just staggering. Let's look at how the costume designer Malgosia Terzanska approached Agnes.
Okay, yeah, the costumes are amazing.
Terzanska really wanted to demonstrate Agnes's literal physical connection to the natural world. So in the opening scene, Agnes is actually wearing a bodice made out of real tree bark cloth.
Wait, real tree bark? I mean, how does an actor even wear that?
Yeah.
I imagine it completely changes how they move and breathe compared to standard cotton or silk.
Oh, it changes everything about their physical presence. So this bark cloth is a fibrous material harvested from between the rough outer bark and the core of certain trees. And it was sustainably sourced from Africa for the film.
Wow.
Yeah, it's stiff, it has a really intense texture, and it holds a shape way differently than woven fabric. So wearing it forces the actor into a much more grounded, deliberate posture. She is quite literally wearing the forest.
That's incredible.
And, while it may not be strictly historically accurate for an everyday woman in Tudor England to wear African bark cloth, it is entirely emotionally accurate for who Agnes is at her core.
It's like an outward manifestation of her internal state. And that philosophy seems to extend perfectly into the color palette of her wardrobe, too, which tells this whole chronological story of its own.
It maps her emotional journey so brilliantly. In the beginning, during the flush of their courtship and early marriage, Agnes's wardrobe is dominated by these vibrant reds and deep oranges. The designers connected this specifically to the root chakra.
Okay, wait, unpack the root chakra concept in this context for us.
Yeah.
Because we usually hear that term in, like, yoga classes, but what does it mean for costume design?
Right. So in esoteric traditions, the root chakra is the energy center at the base of the spine. It governs your sense of physical survival, your grounding to the earth, and your raw primal vitality.
Oh,
So by putting Agnes in these deep blood red colors, she visually becomes the beating heart of the family. She is their lifeblood. But then, obviously, the tragedy happens. Their young son Hamnet dies, and the moment that life force is severed, her wardrobe radically shifts.
completely changes.
Exactly. The vibrant reds disappear, and they're replaced by heavy purples, muted browns, and deadened grays. Terzanska specifically described this new color palette as looking like a scab.
Oof. That is such a visceral image. It's not just a character feeling sad. It's like watching an entire ecosystem die off.
Yeah.
Or like a bruised body trying to protect itself.
Yeah, sorry.
You're watching her emotional wounds literally scab over and harden. And you see this contrasting manifestation in the architecture of the sets, too. I mean, the production designer, Fiona Crombie, used the very bones of the buildings to contrast William and Agnes.
She really did. Whenever the camera focuses on William, particularly before he finds success, he is frequently framed inside the heavy, low-ceilinged timber framework of Tudor houses.
Right, those really oppressive spaces.
Yeah, these spaces are constructed with tight, rigid geometric lines. They visually symbolize a box. He is constrained, trapped in his own intellectual mind, and just unable to fully express himself in that domestic space.
So if William's mind is a rigid, constructed box, you can't just have him act frustrated. You have to build the literal set around him to compress him.
Exactly.
Whereas Agnes's domain is the forest of Arden. There are no straight lines out there. It's infinite, chaotic, organic growth.
And to ground the actors in that reality, director Chloe Zhao insisted on practical sensory details that the actors could actually feel and smell. So for the interior lighting, they didn't just use standard movie lights with, like, a warm filter. They utilized handmade beeswax candles.
Which burn totally differently, right? I mean, they don't have the toxins of modern paraffin, and they emit a very specific, deep, almost honey-colored yellow light.
They do.
Plus, they smell earthy. You're giving the actors an environment that actually smells like the 16th century.
Exactly. And the production design uses these sensory details to deliver a massive subconscious shock right after Hamnet dies. Throughout the early, happy years of their marriage, the heavy drapes surrounding their bed are a vibrant red, again, matching Agnes's lifeblood.
Right, the root chakra colors.
Right. But the moment the boy dies, the film cuts, and the drapes have abruptly and violently shifted to a cold, grayish blue.
Wow. It's like the house itself has gone into shock. The blood is literally drained from the room. And that kind of environmental storytelling leads perfectly into how Chloe Zhao and her cinematographer, Etika Ziel, approached the physical filming process.
Oh, their approach was fascinating.
Because you can't just build a scabbed-over, traumatized set.
Yeah.
The actors have to authentically inhabit it. And to achieve that, Zhao abandoned a lot of traditional filmmaking methods, didn't she?
She really did. Zhao operates under a specific philosophy. She says, directing is not intellectual. She argues that while half of the job requires planning and cerebral thought, the other half has to come entirely from the body's physical instincts.
Which is pretty radical for a period piece.
Totally. And she pushed this to the extreme for the film's most emotionally volatile scene. There's this massive, devastating argument between William and Agnes as their grief just threatens to tear their marriage apart. For this critical scene, Zhao skipped rehearsals completely.
I have to pause on that.
Yeah.
Because skipping rehearsals for a major emotionally explosive argument in a period drama sounds like a recipe for total chaos.
It does, yeah.
Usually actors want to block out their movements, like I stand here, you yell there, I throw the cup here. Doesn't abandoning that safety net risk the scene completely falling apart?
It does risk chaos, but that is exactly the texture of grief Zhao was hunting for. Instead of having Paul Mescal and Jessie Buckley sit at a table and intellectualize their lines, she had them participate in a tantric energy workshop together.
Okay, so what does a tantric energy workshop actually entail when you're using it for acting preparation rather than, spirituality?
Well, in this context, it's about getting entirely out of the cerebral mind and dropping into the nervous system. It involves deep, synchronized breathing, sustained eye contact, and building an acute awareness of the other person's physical presence.
It's getting really grounded with each other.
Exactly. It's about creating a profound sense of physical safety between the two actors. That way, when the cameras roll, they aren't thinking about where to stand or how to modulate their voices. Their reactions are coming purely from their bodies. Because grief isn't just a mental state. It is a heavy, physical exhaustion that lives in your bones.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. You are forcing the actors to survive a real, unpredictable, emotional collision on camera rather than just pantomiming an argument they practiced in a studio 3 weeks ago.
Exactly.
And the way the camera captures that grief is equally unconventional. Because Yule utilized what he called a CCTV camera approach,
Yeah, he also referred to it as death's point of view.
which sounds incredibly eerie. How does a camera actually mimic the point of view of death?
By remaining entirely detached and objective. In a typical emotional drama, the camera pushes in tight on an actor's face to manufacture intimacy. But here, there is this drifting, almost floating camera that just watches the family from a distance, moving slowly through the house.
That is so creepy.
It feels inevitable. It's a constant, chilling reminder that death is present in the room, patiently watching, waiting to make its choice. And the most devastating moment in the film's first half occurs when that drifting camera finally stops its motion and locks into direct eye contact with the young boy, Hamnet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is the visual confirmation that he has been chosen.
That gave me chills just thinking about the mechanics of that shot. And to maintain that heavy, oppressive atmosphere on set, I read that Zhao did something super unusual with music, too.
She did, yeah.
Because normally, movie scores are added months later in post-production. But Zhao blasted Max Richter's incredibly melancholic track on the nature of daylight on a loop out loud while they were filming the tragic scenes.
Just imagine being an actor or a crew member trying to operate the boom mic or adjust a light while this profoundly sad, sweeping string music is physically vibrating through the floorboards all day long.
It sounds emotionally exhausting.
It really soaks the entire environment in a shared communal sadness. You literally cannot escape the emotional weight of the scene. And the attention to audio detail didn't stop with the music either.
Right, there's that amazing piece of sound design trivia.
Yes. The sound design team embedded an extraordinary detail into the ambient background noise. If you listen very closely to the bird song outside the house, there is a bird whistling. But it isn't a random chirp. The bird is actually whistling in perfect iambic pentameter.
That is just brilliant. For anyone who needs a quick refresher from high school English, iambic pentameter is the rhythmic structure Shakespeare used, consisting of 5 beats that mimic a human heartbeat. Da-dum, 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 da-dum.
Exactly.
Having nature itself whistle the heartbeat of the play he hasn't even written yet. It perfectly bridges Agnes's natural world with William's impending literary masterpiece.
It's a beautiful synthesis of the two characters, and it really sets up the tension for the final act of the film, where historical fact and raw emotional fiction finally collide in this spectacular theatrical climax.
Let's separate the historical facts from the film's creative leaps here, because this is where the story really seeks emotional closure. Historically, we know the real Hamnet died in 1596 at the age of 11.
Right.
And while the exact cause isn't recorded, historians heavily suspect the bubonic plague, which was sweeping through at the time. And the historical consensus is that William was likely away working in London when his son passed.
So those are the historical bones. But the film takes a creative leap to bridge the massive emotional chasm between the parents. It imagines a scenario a few years later where Agnes and her brother travel from Stratford to London to stand in the crowd for the very first performance of William's new play, Hamlet.
To capture this, the production team went to extraordinary lengths. I mean, they didn't just ask to film in the modern reconstruction of the Globe Theatre currently sitting in London.
No, they didn't.
They actually built a brand new replica of the original Globe from scratch on a backlot at Elstree Studios. But they made a very specific, almost counterintuitive architectural choice. They built it at 70% scale.
Which is a fascinating decision. If you shrink a massive theater by 30%, you drastically alter the physical relationship between the actors and the audience. Chloe Zhao told her production designer that she wanted the interior of the theater to feel like being inside of a tree.
How does shrinking the scale achieve that feeling, though, of being inside a tree?
Well, it creates a suffocating, inescapable intimacy. At 100% scale, the stage is quite high, and the actors are elevated far above the groundlings standing in the pit. There is a physical and emotional distance.
Right, there's a real barrier there.
But at 70% scale, the stage is lower. The dressing rooms were repositioned. Suddenly, the actors on stage are much closer to eye level with the audience. They can see the sweat, they can hear the breathing. Zhao needed the architecture to force William, standing on the stage, to be able to connect directly and intimately with Agnes standing crushed in the crowd.
And the trivia regarding the physical materials they used to build this scaled-down set is amazing. They sourced reclaimed French oak that had deep, visible scars, knots, and imperfections.
Yeah, that material choice honors a famous piece of theatrical lore. The rumor is that the original Globe Theatre was built using stolen timber.
Stolen timber.
Yeah. The story goes that Shakespeare's acting company dismantled an older, disputed theater in the middle of the night, carried the timbers across the frozen Thames River, and used that stolen wood to build the Globe.
That is wild.
So by using scarred, reclaimed oak for the film set, it adds a literal layer of history and imperfection to the space where the couple's trauma is finally addressed.
So we have this compressed, scarred, intimate wooden theater. And for the climactic sequence, Zhao puts the audience entirely in Agnes's shoes. I understand they spent 6 consecutive days solely filming Jessie Buckley's face reacting in the crowd.
6 days just capturing the micro-expressions of a mother realizing what she is watching. The audience is meant to experience the entire narrative of the play Hamlet purely through Agnes's shock, her confusion, and her eventual devastating understanding.
Which culminates in the zenith of the film.
Yeah.
William steps onto the stage, playing the role of the ghost of Hamlet's father. He looks out into the compressed crowd and locks eyes with his wife.
It's a powerful moment.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's the exact moment she comprehends what her husband has done. He was incapable of saving their son from the plague in real life, so he used the only tool he had to immortalize him. He trapped his son and his own overwhelming grief inside a play that will outlive them all.
It's a profound commentary on how differently these two people process trauma. When the boy died, William couldn't communicate his grief to Agnes in their home. He retreated into his intellectual box, he fled to his writing.
Right.
Agnes, meanwhile, stayed deeply rooted in her body and her sensory world. It is only here, in this shared wooden space of the theater, through the artificial medium of a ghost story, that their two isolated worlds finally intersect.
I am just struck by the sheer irony of this ending. You have a film centered on William Shakespeare, arguably the greatest master of the English language who has ever lived.
Yeah.
And yet, the entire emotional climax of this story relies completely on wordless silence.
Yeah, it really does.
They just stare at each other across the theater. It suggests that grief is a landscape where words completely fail. Language just isn't enough. Only art like the play Hamlet or even the film Hamnet itself can act as a bridge wide enough to connect two broken parents.
Beautifully said. Art becomes the container for the emotions that are simply too large, too chaotic, and too painful for everyday domestic life to hold. By giving his son eternal life on the stage, William finally manages to give his wife a window into his own shattered heart.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the canon of classic literature. It forces you to wonder about the hidden costs of human genius. How many of humanity's greatest masterpieces, our most revered paintings, novels, and plays, were actually co-authored by the quiet grief, the daily sacrifices, and the unseen lives of the family members left behind in the margins of history?
That is a fascinating question to leave on.
And that wraps our deep dive into Hamnet. If you enjoyed this episode, follow Roll Credits and share it with your fellow movie fans, and let me know what film we should cover next, old or new. We'll be back soon with more trivia, more movie magic, and maybe a few more stories hidden behind history.